It got everybody upset that Trump said that he has respect for RFK Jr. Trump said he's got some very important points. Well, just wait until if it gets to a position where it looks like RFK Jr. is his rival, he'll start making fun of his voice or whatever he can to make fun of him. That's what Trump does. I respect him a lot. A lot of people respect him. He's got some very important points to be made. And the reason that he's saying this is because RFK Jr. has been so popular with so many conservatives and libertarians. And so, Trump is doing that to make amends to his base. And then RFK Jr. said, well, just to quell any speculation, under no circumstances will I join Donald Trump on an electoral ticket. Our positions on it did this back on May 10th, as Roger Stone and other people were pushing that idea. Our positions on certain fundamental issues, our approaches to governance, and our philosophies of leadership could not be farther apart. And so even though CNN will not have him on, even though CNN will not do a town hall with him, there's an upstart leftist news organization called News Nation. I don't know who this woman was, who was the person running this town hall, but what an obnoxious, pig-headed person she is. I just got to say, it's difficult to watch her. But it was about an hour and 20 minutes long, and she asked him about the fact that Trump said nice things about him. We'll say that. He likes him for the moment, or he wants to like him. And so here's what RFK Jr. said about division, and I thought it was very good.
Many Democrats fear that you're a spoiler in the race, that you will damage President Biden in the primary and grease the skids for former President Trump to return to the Oval Office. This week, former President Trump said about you, Kennedy is smart and he's a common sense guy. What kind of man do you think Donald Trump is?
Well, here's what I'm not going to do in this race. I'm not going to attack other people personally. I don't think it's good for our country. And I think, what I'm trying to do in this race is bring people together, is to try to bridge the divide between Americans. And guess what? When my dad died and we took this train ride from, this 7.5-hour train ride that was supposed to be 2 hours, I was with him when he died in Los Angeles, and then we brought his body from New York, Penn Station to Union Station and Washington, D.C. And it was a 2.5-hour ride, but it took 7.5 hours because there were 2.5 million people on that train track. And it was a cross-section of America in all of the major urban stations in Trenton, Newark, Wilmington, and Baltimore. There were black Americans singing Battle Hymn of the Republic. There were whites in the rural areas who are holding up signs, "Goodbye, Bobby, pray for us, Bobby," American flag, standing, saluting. 4 years later, and they had supported my father in the primaries in 1968. 4 years later, in 1972, they were not supporting my father, and they were not supporting George McGovern, who was aligned with my father on all these issues. Instead, the vast majority of them were supporting George Wallace. And, my father was able to harness these populist energies. In the last day of his life, he won the most rural state in this country, South Dakota, and the most urban. He was able to bridge the divide among people who would otherwise be Republican, but wanted somebody who was common sense, who was able to appeal to their idealism, who was able to find the hero in each of them, who was able to get them to transcend narrow self-interest and see themselves as part of a community and part of this, incredible American adventure in modeling self-governance for the rest of the world. And so I'm proud that President Trump likes me, even though I don't agree with him on most of his issues, because I don't want to alienate people. I want to bring people together. I'm proud that all these people like me and that I have independent supporters and Democratic supporters, and that I'm able to bring a lot of people. Every Democrat says, I want to end the polarization. But how do you do that without talking to people who don't agree with you? How do you do that without appealing to people? My purpose is to find the issues, the values that we have in common, rather than, focus on the issues and the personalities that keep us all apart.
Yeah, but there are issues that are important. That was very masterful, and it needs to be said. And of course, after that, she comes in and she tries to still make it personal. Let's attack the other guy personally. If you see that clip, she just keeps coming back. But to try to get him to jump into ad hominem attacks, he refuses to do it, rises above it. And he's very skillful rhetorically. It's one of the things that Glenn Greenwald said about his 13-minute thing on vaccines. He goes, this guy is a master at rhetorical stuff. He said, I thought he was really good when I talked to him, one of the best I've ever talked to. But he said, this is really a masterpiece. Well, it's not necessarily a masterpiece. It's the truth, what he was saying about vaccines. That doctor that they had, their Dr. Butt, and this woman were arguing from establishment, from academia. They were not arguing science, and he was arguing science. Oh, well, look, we've gotten rid of, look at how effective this was of getting rid of chickenpox. And he goes, okay, let's talk about that. Chickenpox. He goes, in their trial, they got rid of chickenpox, but you know what happened? They had a massive epidemic of shingles afterwards, and that's far worse than chickenpox. He says, I'm not saying that you can't stop these things. I'm saying they give you other side effects, adverse effects that can be worse than what you were trying to inject people for. And he said, and none of this stuff is tested. That got them really upset. Because no, as I said earlier, we had a lawsuit, said, show us all this stuff. Well, we don't have it. They've also not done anything to investigate the after effects of this. He was talking about none of these vaccines have had placebo tests before they've rolled them out. Just like you have to do with every other drug. They don't do that with the vaccines, he said. And then what he did not talk about, but he has talked about in the past. And so there was an interesting back and forth about gun control. And he began by saying the same stuff that he said about a month ago, June the 5th. He had that Twitter Spaces thing that Elon Musk did. And I actually wrote a Substack on it at the time. Breaking, RFK Jr. makes startling response to gun control. And I thought it was very good because he brought in the SSRI stuff. And saying things like, kids were bringing guns to school all the time for target practice and, ROTC or the rifle club or whatever. I'm the same age as he is, essentially. He's a year older than me. And I saw that as well. And he said they didn't turn the guns on other students. So he says, why is this happening? Why is it happening in America when you got other armed societies like Switzerland that this is not happening? And he takes it back to the SSRIs. And that was excellent. That's what I said. I'm happy that he's running as a candidate because he's saying some very important things that nobody else talks about, except, the alternative media. I've talked about these issues forever. But none of these politicians will go there. And it's important to have these discussions. So I think his candidacy is very important. And he went on to say some other things. He said, I'm a constitutional absolutist. And I said, well, yeah, they all say that. But then they talk about killing the Second Amendment by death of 1,000 cuts, 1,000 infringements. And so he said, he went on to say, the Supreme Court has ruled, quote, in a very expansive interpretation of the right to own a gun. I don't know if he said that on this one. I've got a clip of what he had to say, though, about gun bans. Finally, the Democrat, the Kennedy in him, came through. But he said the Supreme Court has ruled in a very expansive interpretation of the right to own a gun. I said he offered an olive branch by pointing out that the death of his father and his uncle by guns, but then he said, I know as president that you're going to expect me and I'm going to do everything I can to reduce gun violence in this country. I think one of the tools that has been taken out of my hands is taking people's guns away. I agree that he doesn't have the power, I said, but it is not because of the Supreme Court's decision, but because the Constitution recognizes as a God-given right the individual right to keep and bear arms. All of the Bill of Rights is about individual rights until you get down to 9 and 10. And that's where it's, saying, by the way, if we left anything out, you don't have it. You got to have it explicitly given to you, that type of thing. But the first 8 are all about individual rights. They're not about collective rights. They're not about the National Guard, none of that stuff. And so the reason we have those rights is because they're God-given rights. The Second Amendment is a prohibition from the government even infringing on it, even getting around the edge of it. And so that was bothersome. That's his idea of it. And then he went on to say, this is what I said June 5th. He goes on to say that taking people's guns, I don't know that that's the right thing now. Now. Because it'll polarize our country. He goes on to say, quote, we're living in a time when the Constitution has been under attack, all the other amendments in an unprecedented way, and how that would be seen by people who believe strongly in the Second Amendment as part of a systematic assault on our Bill of Rights. But he's waiting. He says, we can do this when we have a consensus. And I said at the time, you understand that little asterisk there tells you where he is, and it's very dangerous. I'm glad he's talking about the SSRI stuff, but he doesn't have a view of the Constitution that is absolutist, in spite of the fact of what he had to say. It's not the Constitution that is absolutist. It is the Supreme Court decision. If it's the Supreme Court and we have a consensus, then we can get rid of it. Well, yes, you can. I mean, there is a process for amending the Constitution, and you could get rid of the Second Amendment, but that's not what he's talking about. Because he went on to say, as she kept pressing him on gun control, he ran through these talking points, which again, I agree with those talking points, but then he had this to say.
Why did this suddenly start? Why is it not happening in Switzerland, which has, a comparable number of guns per capita that we have?
No, we have far more guns per capita.
We have far more, but they have a lot of guns, and their last school shooting was 21 years ago. We're having them every 21 hours.
We have a few more questions we want to get to, but very quickly, in 10 seconds.
Do you believe that we shouldn't even look at that issue?
I want to ask you about the fact that you're running for the Democratic nomination and 77% of Democrats support an assault weapons ban. Do you not support an assault weapons ban?
If we can get a consensus on it, if Republicans and Democrats agreed to it and it passed Congress, I would sign it.
Okay.
My rights are not to be held hostage to a consensus between Republicans and Democrats. End of story. End of story. That came out at a very bad time for Alex. He had just done a video talking about how, here's a video revealed, that he is not, it's called Video Proof. RFK is not coming for your guns. Well, maybe he should actually look at what he has said. Maybe he should be a little bit suspicious of somebody who's a Democrat and a Kennedy in terms of coming at guns. Now, Alex is saying that simply because he wets his finger and sticks it in the air to see which way the wind is blowing. And the wind is blowing towards RFK Jr. As a matter of fact, I criticized what RFK Jr. had to say about the Supreme Court decision on affirmative action. And, the few comments that I got, one person says, yeah, but, he can save us from nuclear weapons and nuclear war and the vaccines and stuff like that. That's really important. And it is. But again, it comes back to what is, what are you depending on? And we'll get to that in just a moment here. But anyway, so when asked about assault weapon ban, he sees the Second Amendment as malleable and open to interpretation by the Supreme Court. And he believes that if you get a consensus of Republicans and Democrats, if the majority of them want to have an assault weapon ban, he'll sign it. He'll sign it. This is, again, the idea that this is a democracy and not a republic. That these God-given rights are privileges that we enjoy at the pleasure of government and that they can take it away from us at any point in time. And this is fundamentally, now you understand why he's running as a Democrat. He made the statement about the assault weapons ban just minutes after intimating that guns are not a problem. That Americans used to bring firearms to school for gun clubs and no one thought of shooting at children. This is the comment from Breitbart. RFK Jr.'s admission that he would sign an assault weapons ban came just over a week after he used the New Hampshire town hall to stand against the idea of taking away guns. And of course, that came right after he had all these same talking points with Musk, with New Hampshire, and then again in this one, but she kept pressing. So he said, yeah, I'll do it. If everybody wants it, I'll do it. No, you don't have that they don't have that power. Two wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner. So Anyway, even though he calls himself a constitutional maximalist, I talked about this, and I had these reservations, and I knew that was eventually where he was going to go. And also on Bearing Arms, their headline, RFK Jr., gun control won't reduce gun violence, but let's ban assault weapons anyway. And then this, what he had to say about the LGBT.
Mr. Kennedy, I have a question. You recently agreed and then withdrew that agreement to speak before a group named the Moms for Liberty. They are a right-wing group that would like to tell other parents how to do their own children, but you agreed to do that. You have mentioned your uncle and your father, but you've not mentioned Ted Kennedy, who I worked with in the United States Senate for 6 years, and his staff on these issues. There was no bigger champion or stalwart for LGBTQ equality than Ted Kennedy, the late Ted Kennedy, and you know that. Explain to me why, as a Democratic voter, I should ever support you in a primary against any other Democrat when you agreed to speak before a group that wants to ban my marriage and tell other parents how to treat their children.
No, that is true, actually.
Speak in front of that group. And when somebody on my staff accepted that invitation, I was unaware of it.
I need to interrupt you for 1 second. As a former congressional staffer, if somebody who's elected blames staff, that's the wrong answer. You have to take responsibility for agreeing to speak before those groups.
I'm at the beginning of a campaign. I have no, long-term staff. We weren't allowed to even raise money until April 5th. So I'm scaling a campaign very, very quickly, and I accept a lot of invitations without the capacity to look into, and I know Teddy had, 86 members on his staff. But when, a member of my staff, through no fault of her own, I accepted that, and when I found out that that was their position, I declined to go. There's nobody, there will be nobody in the Oval Office who is more supportive of LGBTQ rights than I am. I was with Teddy campaigning in the Castro in 1980. That was the first political presidential campaign that ever courted the gay vote. It's very important to me. It's a civil rights, as important as the civil rights to any other group, and their civil rights my family has stood for, has fought for, and I will do the same. I made a mistake by accepting that invitation, and when I found out those positions, I did not show up.
Thank you, James.
Would you denounce what they stand for? That's my question.
Excuse me?
Would you denounce what they stand for? Moms for Liberty is James's question.
I'm not going to issue a denunciation. I'm telling you right now, I don't agree with anybody who says that we shouldn't respect gay rights.
Okay. All right. So this is about gay rights, right? Is that what Moms for Liberty are about? No, Moms for Liberty are about pushing against the grooming of children. If you go to their Twitter account, you'll see at the very top of it, we don't co-parent with the government. This is about the kids. This is the usual strategy that these people have done. It's like, I'm transgender. I can do anything I want, including parading around naked in front of your kids, as we've just seen this month over and over again. Get out of my way. I'm transgender. Let me do whatever I want. I'm gay. Let me have your kids. We're coming for the kids. And of course, he plays along with that. Does he really believe that's what this is about? Does he really believe, as he said, that this is about LGBT civil rights? No. I mean, he may actually believe that, but that's not what it's about. These people, Moms for Liberty, they invited him to speak for the 4th of July. They're at the American Revolution Museum in Philadelphia. And the liberals in Philadelphia is a very leftist city. Philadelphia would tar and feather the founders of this country if they had half a chance. They would like to remove all of the monuments to them as well. And the American Revolution Museum, as they tweeted out, they said, we're going to be here. Said, look at what was just done to it, presumably because of the hatred of Moms for Liberty. They got into the museum. Somebody broke in through the door. They got a picture of that. As a matter of fact, here's the door they broke into. But they went in, and here is I think it looks like it's made out of metal, but it's a large relief of Washington crossing the Delaware, put spray paint on that. They spray painted with graffiti on the outside, Washington crossing the Delaware, spray painted that. I'm assuming that's on the outside. It's on a brick wall. Maybe that's adjacent to that statue that's there. But that's the hatred of the people that goes unpunished. They're allowed to use graffiti on pro-life counseling places. They're allowed to burn them down. The FBI doesn't care. They don't even report it as a crime. But this is Moms for Liberty going to that museum. I think they are possibly not even welcome at the museum, kind of like Kirk Cameron taking wholesome books to libraries. They don't want him there. They want the drag queen storytime hour stuff. But look, we don't co-parent with the government. And they don't like the Marxism that is, and the racism, and they don't like the sexual grooming of kids. And that's what Moms for Liberty is about. And that's the group that when RFK Jr. found out about it, he didn't want to talk to them. Didn't want to talk to them. Oh, he's all about talking to the other side, right? As you just heard. But when push comes to shove, he doesn't do it. Doesn't do it. And so we have to understand when we look at these different issues, when we look at things like nuclear war, we look at things like vaccine, we have to understand there are imminent problems that are facing us. They're right in our face. Very big issues. But we have to also understand that there is an imminent moral standard that comes from an imminent God. And if we do not follow that, quite frankly, I'd much rather face a nuclear war than God's judgment like he brought on Sodom and Gomorrah. You know, God can come after us any number of ways. We can look at what is happening to our society with what Moms for Liberty are opposing in the schools. And you understand that just the natural consequences of what is being done to our children in schools will destroy this nation and destroy our society and our communities and your family and all the rest of this stuff. But God won't necessarily wait for the natural consequences with this thing. And when you go back and you look at vaccines, were we saved from the vaccine stuff by RFK Jr.? I appreciate the research that he did, the information that he put out there, but he was not the only one who was fighting this stuff. And I don't know how he was on the lockdown stuff. I don't know if he was just focusing on the vaccine stuff. I was focused from the very beginning on the lockdown stuff. We don't need a savior. We need information. We need critical thinking. We need individual action. And so this whole idea, well, we got to have him in there because he's going to save us from nuclear war. We got to have him in there because he's going to save us from vaccines and things like that. No, the important contribution of RFK Jr. is when he speaks the truth to people about these things, when he engages in debates, when he calls them out for not engaging in debates. But he's not a savior. Only God is your savior. And you better put him first over this notion that we've got these immediate problems and we got to do something about them. And we got to have somebody there who's, no, God is going to do that. And let me tell you, all the people who went through this thing, and many of you with us, from the very beginning of this, people who stood on their principles. There's nobody that I've talked to, not a single person, who regrets not getting the vaccine. Not a single person. I've seen and talked to and seen publicly a lot of people who regret having gotten it. But nobody regrets not having gotten it. They may not be happy about some of the consequences that were forced on them with the coercion and the blackmail of Joe Biden. But they don't regret not getting it, but it was their decision. It was your decision if you didn't get it. RFK Jr. didn't come in there and stand and interpose between you and them. He didn't come in and talk to the governor or talk to the corporation that you work for or whatever. He didn't do that. He was out there talking to people about the dangers of the vaccine, and good for that, and I applaud him for doing that. But if you didn't do it, it's because you stood against this. Never forget that. And the reason that they backed down on the masks and on the lockdowns and eventually on the vaccines is because American people stopped following them. Why? Because the information finally got out to the people. It's very hard to get this information out, but it finally got out to them. They've done everything they can to shut down people telling the truth about this stuff. But the information got out eventually to people. That's the key. the discussion, the debate. That's what he's important about, but he's not important to stand in the gap for you. I've seen people who have shut down their churches because they had gotten misinformation about this from the beginning, because they trusted these people who were liars. They have regrets, and they won't do it again. And that's important. You know, God is the God of second chances. And, these, even people who have been physically damaged with this, there is something that is over and above this. They've got now immediate problems that are going to affect them perhaps the rest of their life, perhaps shorten their life. But we have to not lose sight of what is important. And these politicians are not our saviors. And these urgent issues are important to talk about. But we don't have to compromise our principles. And we should never compromise our principles. We should never compromise and celebrate this sodomistic attack on our kids because we think this guy, well, I know that's bad, but he's going to save us from nuclear war. He's going to save us from the vaccines. No, you make that kind of deal with the devil, and we are done. We are done. It's that kind of compromise with evil that he did, that you just heard him do. That is fatal to our country. And we don't want leaders like that. And that information must be opposed, and I will oppose that kind of poison that you just heard him say, that kind of spiritual poison. I will oppose that as much as I oppose the poison of the Trump shots. And you should as well. The common man. They created Common Core to dumb down our children. They created Common Pass to track and control us. Their Commons Project to make sure the commoners own nothing. And the communist future. They see the common man as simple, unsophisticated, ordinary. But each of us has worth and dignity, created in the image of God. That is what we have in common. That is what they want to take away. Their most powerful weapons are isolation, deception, intimidation. They desire to know everything about us while they hide everything from us. It's time to turn that around and expose what they want to hide. Please share the information and links you'll find at thedavidknightshow.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. If you can't support us financially, please keep us in your prayers. thedavidknightshow.com.